In a remote African village, life appeared harmonious to an outsider. The clay huts stood close together, smoke curling lazily from thatched roofs, and the sounds of children laughing and goats bleating filled the air. Yet beneath this apparent serenity, currents of envy and rivalry ran deep. Families were intertwined not only by blood but by competition, subtle jealousies and long-standing grudges. Among them, a young girl lived quietly with her family, her days filled with chores, school, and fleeting moments of play in the dusty lanes of the village. She was kind, gentle, and obedient, traits that should have endeared her to those around her. Yet in this village even goodness could breed resentment. Her stepsister, only a few years older, lived under the same roof but viewed the girl with thinly veiled hostility. Outwardly they appeared close. In public they laughed together, shared meals, and spoke softly as if they were inseparable. But behind closed doors the stepsister's heart brimmed with envy. She noticed every compliment the girl received, every small act of recognition from parents or neighbors, and it stoked a simmering malice within her. She would quietly rearrange her sister's belongings, make snide remarks that could barely be heard, and sometimes just watch her with a cold, calculating gaze. The girl, though perceptive, did not immediately understand the full extent of her stepsister's feelings. She sensed tension in fleeting glances and the way their shared tasks became tests of patience, yet she clung to the hope that love and familial duty would prevail. She tried to respond with kindness, offering small gestures of care, helping her stepsister fetch water from the river, sharing the last morsel of food, or smoothing out arguments with gentle words. To the outside eye, it was a picture of sisterhood, two girls supporting each other in a world that demanded obedience, respect, and labor. Even the villagers, who prided themselves on knowing everyone's business, seemed oblivious to the subtle cruelty brewing under that roof. They watched as the two girls went to the market together, laughing and carrying baskets of yams and millet, and they assumed all was well. No one suspected that beneath the smiles lay a silent rivalry, a series of small, calculated acts designed to intimidate, confuse, and unsettle. It was a rivalry nurtured in silence, where the stepsister's jealousy transformed mundane moments into opportunities for subtle torment. Yet this environment of closeness and covert malice shaped the girl in ways she did not yet realize. She became observant, learning to notice the slight shifts in expression, the tone of voice, and the unspoken messages carried in a glance. Every day she adapted, careful not to provoke the stepsister further, and tried to navigate her world without drawing unnecessary attention. This constant balancing act built patience, endurance, and a quiet inner strength that would later become essential. As the sun rose and fell over the village, life continued with its predictable rhythm. Children ran through dusty streets, women prepared meals, and men tended the fields. But within the walls of one small hut, a quiet battle unfolded, unnoticed and unseen by the larger village. The girl and her stepsister shared the same space, the same family, the same roof, yet their hearts were miles apart. One carried innocence, hope, and kindness. The other carried envy, malice, and a cunning desire to see her sister falter. It was in this village of secrets and rivalry, where appearances often masked truth, that the first seeds of the story were sown. The girl, unaware of the dangers that lay ahead, would soon learn that even the closest bonds could harbor shadows. The stepsister's quiet cruelty, nurtured in envy and jealousy, would set the stage for events that would defy expectation, transforming a simple act of malice into a lesson far beyond the village's narrow paths. This environment, where love and rivalry intertwined, where kindness met covert hostility, would forge the girl's resilience and begin her journey toward an awakening that none of the villagers could foresee. The stepsister had been plotting for days, her mind swirling with thoughts of mischief and malice. Each time she watched her younger sister laugh, help their parents, or receive even the smallest compliment, a spark of jealousy flared within her. She wanted not just to scare the girl but to remind her, in the most terrifying way, that she could be powerless, that the world could turn against her in an instant. Her plan took shape in the quiet hours of the evening, when the village slept and the moonlight cast long shadows over the huts. She knew that the girl was diligent in her evening routine, tidying the bed and preparing for sleep without complaint. This predictability, once a symbol of the girl's innocence, became the perfect opportunity for the stepsister's cruel plot. She slithered quietly to the corner of the hut where an old venomous snake, captured days earlier and hidden in a basket, awaited. The snake had been fed and cared for just enough to remain active and alert, and now it would serve as an instrument of fear. With a mixture of anticipation and wicked glee, the stepsister waited until her sister fell asleep, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. Then with careful hands she slipped the coiled snake beneath the blankets. Every movement was deliberate, every glance over her shoulder confirmed that no one was watching. The thrill of secrecy, the knowledge that she could control the girl's fear, made her heart race. She imagined the scream, the flailing arms, and the confusion that would follow. The plan was simple but perfect in its cruelty. Meanwhile, the girl, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath her sheets, slept soundly, her dreams untouched by the impending terror. She had no reason to suspect her stepsister's intentions, no hint of the envy simmering in the other girl's heart. When she awoke in the small hours of the night, the air felt different, heavier, charged with something unnatural. She shifted under the blanket, and the moment her hand brushed the snake's cold, scaly body, a scream tore from her throat. Fear gripped her instantly. Her heart pounded, and every instinct screamed for her to flee. She froze for a moment, paralyzed by shock, unable to comprehend the danger that had appeared so suddenly in her own bed. Confusion clouded her mind. How had the snake arrived? Why now? The betrayal, once realized, cut deeper than the venomous fangs could have. It was not just the snake that threatened her, it was the knowledge that the one she trusted most under the same roof had orchestrated her terror. From the corner, the stepsister stifled a laugh, hiding behind the wall as she watched the girl's panic unfold. Each scream, each frantic movement, filled her with a perverse sense of triumph. She had always been clever, always quick to manipulate, but this was her masterpiece. The girl's fear was a symphony and she, the orchestrator, reveled in it. Her mind danced ahead, imagining how the story would spread through the village, how her sister would be embarrassed, and how she herself would emerge as cunning and dominant in this twisted game. The girl, in her terror, finally managed to push the blanket aside, her wide eyes locking onto the snake's sinuous form. Her pulse raced, her legs trembled, and yet a spark of resilience began to ignite within her. Despite the shock, despite the betrayal, she understood she had to face this danger. The stepsister's scheme, meant to humiliate and terrify, had unknowingly forced the girl to confront fear in its rawest form. By the time the first hints of dawn crept into the hut, the girl had survived the night's terror, her mind whirling with disbelief and cautious understanding. The stepsister, meanwhile, could hardly contain her glee, certain that she had successfully asserted her dominance. Yet the events of that night were only the beginning, a prelude to a reckoning neither she nor the village could anticipate. The moment the girl's hand brushed against the cool, sinuous body beneath the blankets, terror erupted like a firestorm inside her chest. Her eyes widened, her breath hitched, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The snake, its scales glinting faintly in the moonlight that filtered through the hut's small window, coiled with a deadly elegance. Panic surged, yet she knew she had to remain still. Any sudden movement could provoke the creature. Every nerve in her body screamed to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The walls of the small hut, which had once felt safe, now pressed in on her like a cage. Her mind raced with confusion. How had this happened? Why was the snake here beneath her own blanket? A sense of helplessness washed over her. She wanted to call for help, to scream loud enough for someone, anyone, to come to her rescue, yet the fear of further betrayal stilled her voice. The realization that her stepsister had placed this threat so deliberately sent waves of anger mingled with horror through her fragile body. Betrayal cut sharper than fear, and she understood, with a sickening clarity, that the danger was both physical and emotional. The snake shifted slightly, sensing her trembling hands. Its movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, and the girl's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She tried to calm herself, focusing on her breathing, attempting to steady her shaking hands. Each inhale was shallow, each exhale trembling, but she forced herself to stay composed. Her survival depended on stillness, on patience, on quiet calculation rather than impulsive panic. Minutes stretched like hours as the girl assessed her options. She thought of the tiny window high on the wall, the door that was just a thin barrier of wood, and the narrow space around her bed. Every escape route seemed fraught with danger, yet every second she remained still was a victory over the immediate threat. Her eyes never left the snake, studying its patterns, its subtle flick of the tongue, its alertness. In her terror, she began to sense its rhythm, almost a dialogue forming between predator and prey, unspoken but intensely real. The tension was almost unbearable. Each sound outside, the low murmur of a night breeze, the distant cry of a nocturnal animal, made her flinch. Shadows danced on the walls, fueled by flickers of moonlight and her own panicked imagination. The hut itself seemed to close in, the ceiling lower, the corners darker. Yet amid the fear, a strange clarity began to settle over her mind. She realized she could not act recklessly. The snake was not yet aggressive, it merely responded to her movements. Control, she understood, might be her only weapon. Hours passed slowly, marked by the girl's silent prayers and careful observation. She shifted just enough to adjust her position, always keeping the snake in sight. She whispered calming words to herself, a quiet mantra that balanced terror with resolve. Though her body ached, though sweat and cold mixed on her skin, she refused to surrender entirely to panic. By the time the first hint of dawn began to brush the edges of the sky, the girl had endured the night's terror. Her arms and legs trembled from tension and adrenaline, but she had survived, her mind sharpened and alert. The snake remained beneath her blanket, an enigmatic presence that neither struck nor fled. In that night of helplessness and fear, she had confronted not only the immediate danger but the cruel hand that had placed it there. She emerged from the ordeal changed, her senses heightened, her awareness of both fear and cunning deepened. The night had been long, a trial of courage and wit, and though her body ached, her spirit burned brighter. The girl understood that the events of this single night were only the beginning, a prelude to revelations and power that would one day turn fear into something far more extraordinary. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the village, painting the huts in soft gold, the girl awoke with a cautious heart. She blinked against the morning light, her body stiff from the night's terror, her mind still echoing with the memory of the cold, smooth scales beneath her hands. Tentatively, she reached for the blanket, half expecting to feel the snake coiled beneath it once more. But the bed was empty. Her pulse, still racing from the previous night, began to slow as relief mingled with confusion. The snake was gone. She rose slowly, her senses sharpened by the ordeal. Every creak of the hut, every whisper of the wind seemed amplified, and yet there was a strange sense of balance now, a calm that had not existed the night before. Her stepsister's laughter, her whispered threats, the cruel glee, all of it seemed distant, powerless. But before she could dwell on her newfound relief, a commotion erupted from the other side of the village. Voices rose in panic, shouting and screaming, carrying a tone of terror that immediately drew the girl's attention. Curiosity and caution guided her feet as she approached the source of the chaos. The villagers gathered near the stepsister's hut, their expressions contorted with fear. Mothers clutched their children, elders shook their heads in disbelief, and even the bravest young men froze, unsure how to react. The girl's heart quickened. She sensed that the snake, the same creature that had terrorized her, was no longer in her bed, and the scene before her confirmed that something extraordinary had occurred. From the doorway of the stepsister's home came screams of pure panic. The stepsister herself was caught in the center of the chaos, stumbling backward as the snake, now fully aware of its surroundings, slithered through the room with a fluid, determined motion. Its presence was commanding, almost intelligent, and the fear in the household was immediate and unrelenting. Furniture toppled as the family tried to flee, and the once boastful girl now cowered at the very danger she had intended for her stepsister. The villagers watched in awe and trepidation, whispering among themselves. No one could explain how the snake had traveled overnight, seemingly guided by some unseen force. Some suspected magic, others muttered about ancestral spirits, and a few thought it was punishment from the heavens. The stepsister, who had laughed and plotted, was now trapped in her own home, trembling as the creature moved closer, its eyes glinting with a quiet intelligence that mirrored the girl's own resilience from the night before. Standing at the edge of the crowd, the girl felt a mix of triumph and strange serenity. She had endured the night of terror with courage, and now the consequences of cruelty had turned toward those who had sought to harm her. The snake's movement was precise, almost deliberate, as if acknowledging her struggle and asserting a balance of justice. It was not attacking indiscriminately, it was a messenger, a force that reflected the consequences of envy, malice, and betrayal. By the time the sun climbed higher, the village had begun to grasp the lesson of the night. The stepsister's household was thrown into disarray, their fear evident in every gesture. The snake, now settled in the stepsister's home, became a living symbol of the girl's resilience, a reminder that cruelty could rebound in unexpected ways. For the girl, this morning revelation marked a turning point. She had survived, she had endured, and she had witnessed the first ripple of power that her fearlessness had set into motion. The stepsister awoke to a faint rustling, the kind that might have gone unnoticed in ordinary mornings. But this morning was far from ordinary. Her eyes flew open and she froze as a cold, undulating movement caught her attention. The snake, the very creature she had hidden in her stepsister's bed to incite terror, was no longer confined to the girl's room. It was here, moving with purpose across her own floor. Panic clawed at her chest, her heart hammering like a drum in the silence. Her mind raced, struggling to comprehend how the snake had appeared. She stumbled backward, knocking over a clay pot that shattered on the floor, its fragments a stark punctuation to her mounting terror. She shouted, hoping someone would hear, but her voice felt feeble and insignificant against the weight of the moment. The snake's eyes, dark and unblinking, seemed to reflect every malicious thought she had harbored, every cruel grin she had worn while plotting. It was as though the creature carried the memory of her cruelty, now returning it with chilling precision. As the snake coiled and shifted through the room, the stepsister's bravado evaporated. The fear she had inflicted on another now consumed her entirely. She tried to run, but the confines of her hut and the deliberate movements of the serpent made escape impossible. Every step she took was met with the eerie awareness that the danger she thought she had controlled was in fact beyond her control. She felt a growing sense of remorse, an acknowledgement that her scheming, her laughter at another's terror, had set in motion a force far stronger than she anticipated. The panic escalated as the snake brushed against furniture and corners of the room, moving with uncanny intelligence. The stepsister's hands shook as she grabbed at chairs and tables, desperately attempting to create barriers, to regain a semblance of safety. Yet every barrier she erected seemed futile. Her fear was absolute, gnawing at the edges of her mind, and the room itself seemed charged with a tense energy that mirrored the chaos she had caused. Memories of the previous night flooded her, her stepsister's terrified cries, the silent endurance, the helplessness she had mocked. Now those memories pressed upon her like a weight, magnifying the horror of her present predicament. The snake's presence was not merely a threat to her body but a mirror reflecting her heart and her choices. For the first time she truly felt the consequences of her cruelty, the way it could rebound in ways no human intervention could prevent. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from fear, but from the dawning realization of what she had done. The terror she had tried to impose on another had returned to her, amplified and undeniable. She stumbled to the center of the hut, her knees weak, her breath ragged, and she whispered apologies, not that the snake would heed them but that she could acknowledge her guilt. The animal, sensing her change, seemed to pause, its movements deliberate, almost sentient, as if marking the moment of reckoning. By the time the villagers began to gather outside, drawn by the commotion, the stepsister was a picture of shock and despair. The household that had once been a stage for her cruelty was now the epicenter of fear and remorse. Her mind churned with understanding. The laughter she had directed at another, the malice she had nurtured, had returned with a force that demanded recognition. In that quiet, terrifying moment, the stepsister grasped the lesson that cruelty rebounds, that envy and scheming can never truly remain contained. The girl stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, her posture calm and measured, as though the world around her was moving in slow motion. She had survived the night of terror, faced the hidden snake, and endured her stepsister's cruel plotting. Now, as chaos unfolded in the other house, she remained quiet, observing every detail with sharp clarity. Her eyes traced the movements of the serpent as it coiled and slithered, noting the panic etched on every face, especially that of her stepsister. Unlike the villagers and her stepfamily who shouted and scattered in fear, the girl's mind was alert, processing the unfolding events with a mixture of awe and understanding. She recognized the pattern of cause and effect. The malice she had endured had catalyzed a force that now mirrored cruelty back onto its originator. The snake, once meant to terrorize her, had become a living instrument of justice, moving deliberately, responding to the fear and intent around it. Every twitch of its body, every flick of its tongue, seemed to echo the energy that the stepsister had poured into the night's scheme. Her silence was not mere inaction, it was a conscious choice to observe and understand. She noted how the villagers reacted, their whispers of confusion, their trembling movements, the mixture of awe and fear that permeated the air. The girl realized that she held a kind of power that did not require anger or retaliation. Her endurance, her quiet resilience, had already set forces in motion that were beyond human control. The stepsister's cruelty had unwittingly awakened consequences that no one, not even the girl herself, could fully predict or command. She watched as her stepsister tried to flee, stumbling over overturned furniture, shrieking at the unrelenting presence of the serpent. The fear in her sister's eyes mirrored the fear she had felt countless times at the hands of others. Yet there was no gloating in the girl's expression, no satisfaction in witnessing the torment. Instead, there was a deep comprehension of balance, of how energy, malice, cruelty, intent, moves in cycles that often return to their origin. She understood that the stepsister's suffering was both a warning and a natural consequence, a reflection of the justice embedded in the world around them. The girl's eyes shifted to the villagers, noting their mixed emotions. Some were horrified, others fascinated, a few whispered of magic or ancestral intervention. She recognized that they too were learning, though perhaps in fear rather than understanding. Her presence, calm and composed, offered a quiet contrast to the panic, showing that true power often lies not in shouting or reacting, but in endurance, perception, and observation. As the snake finally settled, coiled in a corner of the stepsister's hut, the girl maintained her stance, her gaze steady. She felt the weight of what had been unleashed, aware that while she had not commanded it, she had been its catalyst simply by surviving and refusing to break under cruelty. There was a clarity in her mind. Patience, silence, and observation often reveal truths and powers that rash actions and malice can never attain. The village awoke to a ripple of panic, the kind that spreads faster than fire through dry grass. Whispers began at the edges of huts, growing louder as neighbors crowded together, eyes wide with disbelief and fear. The story traveled swiftly. A snake hidden in one girl's bed by her stepsister had mysteriously appeared in the stepsister's home. The details grew more fantastical with every retelling, and soon the village was alive with speculation, dread, and awe. Villagers gathered cautiously at a distance, peering through cracks in walls, over fences, and between trees. They observed the snake, which moved with an eerie intelligence, responding to the chaos around it. Some claimed it was the girl's power that had manifested in the serpent, a mystical force born of endurance and hidden strength. Others whispered that the spirits of ancestors had intervened, punishing cruelty and envy. Elder women shook their heads, muttering warnings about disrespecting both family and the unseen forces that governed life. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts, their wide eyes reflecting both fear and fascination, while young men debated whether it was a curse, a lesson, or an omen of misfortune yet to come. The stepsister's family scrambled, trying to regain control over the situation, but their efforts were futile. Every shout, every gesture of authority, only seemed to provoke the snake further. The villagers watched in a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction as the chaos unfolded. They had witnessed cruelty before, had seen arguments and fights, but this was unlike anything they had ever imagined. Nature itself seemed to bend to the rules of justice, reflecting the imbalance created by human malice. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed that the girl was secretly blessed by the ancestors, her patience and endurance giving her a connection to forces beyond ordinary understanding. Others insisted that the snake was a direct messenger of vengeance, a living embodiment of the suffering she had endured. Elder men convened quietly, debating whether this was a natural consequence, a supernatural warning, or a combination of both. Each interpretation carried a moral lesson, a cautionary tale about cruelty, envy, and the unseen power of those who endure injustice without faltering. As the day progressed, fear intensified. Villagers avoided entering the stepsister's house, crossing the street or choosing longer paths to bypass the scene entirely. Some spoke of protective charms, rituals, or offerings needed to appease whatever forces had been stirred. Mothers clutched their children tightly, while the young whispered among themselves about the girl's mysterious power. Even the bravest among them felt a creeping sense of respect mixed with terror, realizing that the world was larger and more unpredictable than they had ever considered. Amid the chaos, the girl remained calm, observing reactions without a word. Her presence alone became a point of silent authority. People noticed her steady composure, her eyes bright with quiet understanding, and slowly began to connect the dots. The cruelty of the stepsister had unleashed forces that could not be tamed, and the girl who had been victimized was at the center of it all. Discussions turned from mockery and gossip to awe and caution. Adults debated what steps, if any, should be taken to restore balance, while the young absorbed the spectacle as a living lesson in justice, patience, and hidden strength. By evening, the village had settled into a tense rhythm of watchfulness. The snake had returned to a corner, seemingly sated, and the stepsister had retreated in shame and fear. The villagers, though wary, began to understand that cruelty carries consequences that no one can fully anticipate or control. Stories of the event were recounted in hushed tones, each retelling emphasizing different aspects: the girl's endurance, the snake's mysterious behavior, or the moral lesson learned by the stepsister. Through fear, speculation, and wonder, the village had collectively acknowledged the unseen forces at play. They realized that human actions, especially acts of malice, ripple outward in ways that demand recognition and accountability. The girl, once ignored and tormented, became a silent figure of power and wisdom, teaching the community that justice can manifest in forms beyond their comprehension, and that cruelty never goes unpunished. The girl stood at a distance, watching the chaos she had endured unfold into its natural consequence. The snake, a creature that had once been a tool of terror in her stepsister's hands, moved through the house with a purpose that seemed almost deliberate. It did not strike or bite the girl, nor did it show malice toward her. Its energy, coiled and alive, was directed solely toward teaching a lesson. Every hiss, every sudden movement, was a reminder of the harm that cruelty and jealousy can invite upon the one who wields them. Inside the house, the stepsister's panic was palpable. Her eyes darted in every direction, her voice trembling as she shouted and stumbled, trying to regain control over what had spiraled far beyond her intentions. She realized with a growing horror that her act of malice had not merely failed but had become a mirror of her own intentions. The snake's presence was not random, it reflected the fear and envy she had cultivated, magnified and made tangible before the eyes of everyone in the village. The family watched in a mixture of disbelief, fear and shame. The stepmother, who had long encouraged cruelty, could not mask the terror that danced across her features. The household, which had thrived on hierarchy and harsh discipline, was now disrupted by a force that required no words or orders to demonstrate its point. Every scream, every stumble and every tremor of fear was a lesson in humility, and the family could not deny it. They realized that jealousy and cruelty create consequences that follow the initiator, sometimes in forms that cannot be controlled or predicted. Outside, the villagers observed the spectacle with a tense mixture of fascination and apprehension. Some whispered about ancestral intervention, claiming that the snake was a messenger of justice sent to correct the imbalance caused by human malice. Others debated whether the girl herself held secret powers that had been dormant but were now evident to anyone who watched. Children peered from behind huts, captivated by the unfolding lesson, while adults considered the social and moral ramifications of what they were witnessing. The air was thick with fear. The morning after the incident, the village was quiet but charged with tension, a stillness that spoke louder than any voice. The snake, now coiled in a corner of the stepsister's house, was no longer frantic but seemed poised with a deliberate calm. Every movement it made carried weight, every hiss echoed like a warning. Word of what had occurred traveled rapidly through the village, reaching neighbors, elders and children alike. Whispers mingled with awe and fear as people tried to interpret the meaning of the strange events. The girl, once victimized, remained unharmed, while the stepsister, who had sought to instill terror, found herself confronted by a force beyond her control. Inside the household, the stepsister faced the full weight of her actions. She could not deny that her cruelty had backfired in the most unexpected manner. Every gesture of anger, every attempt to assert dominance, had been mirrored by the snake's behavior, forcing her to confront the fear she had so callously attempted to inflict. Her hands trembled, her face pale, as she realized that the malicious intent she had harbored did not vanish once enacted. It had found a way to return, amplified and undeniable. Her screams and frantic movements did little to change the situation, rather they reinforced the lesson. The girl, standing quietly in the doorway, radiated a calm resilience that contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. She observed with silent clarity, aware that the power of the moment was not hers alone but also a lesson for the stepsister, the family, and the entire village. She did not raise her voice, she did not attempt to intervene. Her endurance and patience had created a space where justice could manifest naturally, through the behavior of the snake and the consequences of cruelty itself. In her stillness she exemplified a profound understanding. Those who act with malice cannot escape the natural repercussions of their actions, no matter how small or covert their initial cruelty. Outside the house, villagers gathered in hesitant clusters. Fear had tempered their usual curiosity, no one dared approach too closely, yet all eyes were fixed on the unfolding scene. Mothers pulled children back, elders murmured warnings, and young men shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or observe. Every spectator sensed the moral gravity of the moment. The village had witnessed a rare alignment of justice and consequence, where cruelty was met with tangible repercussions, yet the innocent remained untouched. The air was thick with reverence, an unspoken acknowledgement that human actions were observed and measured by forces beyond mere human understanding. As the day progressed, the snake's presence became a living reminder of this truth. It moved with a deliberate rhythm, sometimes resting, sometimes gliding across the floor in a way that mirrored the stepsister's movements and reactions. The household, once filled with the hubbub of daily life, was now consumed by careful observation and silent reflection. Every attempt to manipulate or control the situation only resulted in further discomfort and embarrassment for the stepsister. Her frustration grew, yet she could not bring herself to act violently against the creature, recognizing that any aggression would only deepen her suffering. The stepmother, who had long encouraged and condoned acts of cruelty, watched helplessly. Her voice, once commanding, was muted by the undeniable presence of natural justice. She realized with a creeping fear that her own history of harshness might also be held to account if unchecked cruelty persisted in her household. The lesson was becoming clear to everyone. Acts of malice carry consequences that are inescapable, and sometimes those consequences are enacted by the very natural world that one might assume powerless. Children in the village, usually fearless and boisterous, began to gather at the edges of the property, whispering among themselves about the strange events. Some speculated that the girl had been blessed by ancestral spirits, her patience and endurance granting her protection and influence over forces invisible to ordinary perception. Others believed that the snake itself was a messenger, a living instrument of justice designed to correct the imbalance created by human envy and cruelty. The collective imagination of the village worked overtime, translating fear into understanding, and awe into moral reflection. As evening fell, the snake retreated into a corner, coiled and watchful, signaling the end of its immediate intervention. Yet the lesson had already taken hold. The stepsister, exhausted and shaken, sat trembling on a mat, forced to reckon with her own malice. She could no longer dismiss the power of her actions or the inevitability of natural consequences. Her cries of fear had been heard, but they were no longer about self-pity, they were about recognition, accountability, and the realization that cruelty leaves a mark beyond human perception. The villagers, too, began to internalize the lesson. Conversations shifted from gossip and mockery to reflection and warning. Elders spoke in hushed tones about the dangers of envy, the necessity of compassion, and the unseen forces that safeguard justice. Children were quietly reminded that acts of malice could have far-reaching and unpredictable repercussions. Even those who had once participated in the mockery of others began to reconsider their behavior, aware that the world around them was not passive but responsive to their actions. Over the following days, the village began to adapt. Families treated one another with greater care, and public punishments were reconsidered with thoughtfulness and caution. The girl, now quietly respected, continued her daily life, but her presence was imbued with a newfound reverence. People spoke of her in whispers, acknowledging that endurance and integrity can summon justice in ways that defy expectation. The snake, once a tool of fear, had become a symbol of natural accountability, a living reminder that cruelty and envy invite consequences beyond human control. The stepsister's recovery from the ordeal was gradual. Each day, she faced not only the memory of her fear but also the lingering knowledge that her intentions had directly contributed to her suffering. She became quieter, more reflective, and increasingly aware of how her actions affected those around her. The experience humbled her, teaching a lesson about humility, empathy, and the real power of restraint. She learned that malicious intent can never escape notice, and that the universe in its own ways maintains balance and justice. The girl, meanwhile, continued to embody the principles that had guided her through the ordeal: patience, observation, and quiet strength. She did not boast or claim credit. Her power was demonstrated through the events themselves. The village, now transformed by witness and experience, began to recognize that moral authority and natural consequence are intertwined. The community learned to respect both human endurance and the unseen forces that guard it, understanding that cruelty disrupts harmony, while compassion preserves it. In time, the story of the snake and the stepsister became legend. It was told and retold as a cautionary tale, that jealousy and cruelty, even when hidden or subtle, are never without consequence. Natural justice has ways of manifesting that humans cannot control, and endurance, patience, and moral clarity are shielded by forces beyond ordinary comprehension. The village, once casual in its judgments and quick to mock, became a community more attuned to fairness, reflection, and the moral weight of every action. Generations later, the story remained a cornerstone of teaching. Children learned not only to fear cruelty but to respect the power of endurance. Families were reminded that envy corrodes the heart and that acts of malice invite repercussions that can appear in unexpected forms. The girl's calm, unwavering strength became a symbol, and the snake, a living instrument of moral correction, was remembered as an agent of justice that had silently enforced what humans alone could not. The village had witnessed firsthand that actions, whether born of malice or kindness, ripple outward in ways that cannot always be seen. The stepsister's suffering, the girl's survival, and the community's reflection combined to form a tapestry of lessons, both immediate and enduring. The power of natural consequence, when paired with moral clarity and patience, proved undeniable. The snake had been the medium, but the message transcended it. Cruelty carries its own punishment, and endurance earns its own protection. The story of the girl and the snake quickly became woven into the very fabric of village memory, passed down in hushed whispers around evening fires and sung aloud during festivals. Her calm endurance, the way she had faced danger without panic, and the manner in which natural forces intervened to protect her left an indelible impression on every listener. Children grew up learning her tale not merely as entertainment but as a moral compass. Envy and cruelty carry consequences that extend beyond human understanding, while patience and integrity summon protection in ways unseen. Over time, the girl herself became a symbol of quiet strength. She did not boast of the incident, nor did she use it to elevate herself above others. Instead, she carried on with her daily life, embodying humility and wisdom. Villagers would point to her as an example of how resilience can command respect even from those who seek to harm you. Mothers would tell their children, "Be like her, calm, patient, and strong, and no evil can touch you," instilling in the next generation a sense of moral vigilance. The stepsister, who had once schemed so cruelly, became a cautionary character within the same story. Her fear and remorse demonstrated the immediate consequences of envy and malice. Families would recount her panic at the snake's presence, her realization that cruelty rebounds, and her eventual transformation into someone more aware of her actions. In this way, the tale taught both sides of the human experience, the virtue of the innocent and the peril awaiting the wicked. Rituals and daily life in the village subtly reflected the girl's legacy. The snake, long after returning to the wild, became a symbol of moral balance, a reminder that natural forces respond to human behavior. Some villagers left offerings near the tree where the incident occurred, seeking to honor the invisible guardians who had protected the girl. Others invoked her story when disputes arose, using it to guide judgment and temper jealousy or resentment. Over the years, storytellers embellished the tale, adding depth and nuance without changing its core lesson. They described how the girl's silence was more powerful than any shout, how her observation revealed truths others ignored, and how the natural world itself acknowledged her virtue. Each retelling reinforced the central idea, that innocence coupled with courage can turn danger back on the oppressor, and that cruelty, no matter how subtle, is never without consequence. Even in neighboring villages, the legend spread. Travelers shared the story at markets and along trade routes, and soon it became a regional parable, respected and feared. Parents and elders would cite her example to teach restraint, empathy, and awareness of the unseen forces that govern life. Her life, though ordinary in appearance after the event, had achieved extraordinary moral significance. Ultimately, the girl became immortal in the collective memory of her people, not through acts of violence or revenge, but through endurance, calm observation, and the just intervention of the world around her. She reminded everyone that human malice cannot always triumph over virtue and that patience and moral clarity can summon unexpected forms of justice. Her story endured because it spoke to universal truths, that innocence holds power, cruelty invites reckoning, and the natural world is never indifferent. Generations later, children would still listen with wide eyes, hearts racing, as elders recounted how the snake, once hidden in a bed, had returned to punish the wicked. The village continued to thrive, tempered by the wisdom of her legend, carrying forward the understanding that envy and betrayal are dangerous, while resilience and virtue are protected. In the end, the girl's calm courage and the snake's uncanny justice became inseparable in the minds of the people. She was remembered not just as a victim or survivor, but as a beacon of integrity whose story transcended fear, cruelty, and human pettiness. Her legacy endured, a guiding light for generations, warning against envy and cruelty while inspiring strength, patience, and faith in the unseen balance that governs the world.